All right, folks, welcome in to the NFL Draft Bible State of Football live show. I am Joe DeLeone today, filling in for Rick Saratella. David Turner was the host yesterday. I'll try to give a little bit more energy than David does. But joining me is Russ Lande and also John Murphy. Russ, scout with the Calgary Stampeders, and then John, vice president of player personnel for the Toronto Argonauts. Guys, how are you doing this morning?
Excellent, Joe.
I'm doing great. So good to meet you and see you here.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back. Second time. I'm also going to be hosting the Thursday show. Love talking football with anybody who's willing. And I want to get into, John, you mentioned when we were getting ready to go today that you had one of the most unexpected picks, I think, out of anybody when it comes to NFL game picks. You picked Washington to beat an undefeated Pittsburgh Steelers team. Now, I wasn't around yesterday to catch you make that prediction, and I'm sure some of our listeners might have missed that. Even if they did catch it, I got to know, how come you ended up making that decision, and also how you feeling after making that correct prediction?
Well, I think, the last couple of weeks, it started with that Steelers-Cowboys game, right? You watch that game and, majority of the first half and even parts of the second half, for the Cowboys to be hanging around with Garrett Gilbert playing quarterback for them against the Steelers, that started to make you wonder, was that a one-off scenario where, maybe they just didn't take them, as seriously in that game? But you watch, there's been a couple of moments here where the Steelers, much like the Bills, the offense is all generated quarterback and passing game only. And when you're looking at the matchup there, what does Washington do best? They're number one, on paper, pass defense. They have that front four. You're playing at a funky time, and the Steelers have had games been moving around, and you're kind of carrying this 11-0 record there. So to me, it just felt like an opportunity with the fit of the matchup that it could be a much better game than what I thought, and like I said, I love Ricky to death, but we're in a little competition and I needed to throw him a curveball, and I knew he was no chance that he would fall for doing anything but picking the Steelers. So one more I'm ahead by, and I think I'm up by 2 scores. We're almost thinking of putting in the backups there, Russ. I'm almost starting to think I can, start doing some rotations down the stretch here. Maybe even pick the Jets one week. I can kind of flex my bench and go do some crazy things. But
without Greg Williams there anymore, maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to pick the Jets.
Hey, yeah, all I got to do is, they pick the Raiders, pick the Bucks, don't pick against the Cardinals, and I can kind of glide home because Rick's going to pick the same teams every week.
And just always pick against the Chargers. You're probably guaranteed to win. And I got to tell you, to me, the Steelers were not a dominant team. They're a very good team, and this may be a benefit because I'm sure there are 2 or 3 veterans that have been going out there saying, I'm going to tough it out to play hurt because we want to stay undefeated. I wouldn't be surprised if next week 2 or 3 of their guys that have been battling injuries sit for a week or 2, get healthy for the last game or 2 before the playoffs. So they still have a 2-game lead to have that bye, so they're in a good situation. A lot of time taking that pressure off, getting that loss ends up being a better thing in the long run.
And that was the one thing that you heard from some people who did end up picking Washington in this game. A lot of the injuries came into play here. You're coming off of a short week. This isn't the same team that we saw at the beginning of the year when you had Bud Dupree, you had Devin Bush. It's banged up. It's not the same unit by any measure. So it's makes sense why some people were willing to pick. And John, you picked the right time to go against the Steelers. It'll be interesting to see if they can actually finish the rest of the season without another messy loss like that one.
Well, and the other part is, did we, I know we mentioned it before Alex Smith came back to play, that it's the best comeback story of the year if he comes back and just steps on the field, even if he's the third stringer, and doesn't get activated. Did he win comeback player of the year over Ben Roethlisberger yesterday by beating him head to head?
I think, unfortunately, while that may have played an influence, I honestly think as soon as he got on the field and played this year, he had sort of locked that award up because it's been a long time since somebody dealt with an injury like that to get back on the field.
I don't even know if most guys can get back onto the field after something like that. I don't know if you guys saw, there was a documentary produced about the injury. I didn't catch the entirety of it, but somebody filled me in on has a physical training background, and they were telling me all the crazy things that they had to do just to get his leg back together, to get the muscle back onto his calf. So, I mean, I'd argue that he could throw an interception for every pass in my eyes, and he'd still deserve that award, because some people thought that he was going to lose his leg.
It's truly amazing that he's back on the field. And I don't think we still haven't seen the old Alex Smith, even throwing the ball. I think he's still working his way back to being where he was. But I think what he's being is smart, efficient, not putting the ball into any bad spots. And when you have one of the most dominant front fours in the league on defense, that's generally going to keep the game close, oftentimes that's all you need to do. I mean, you look at that defense, Montez Sweat is just their third or fourth defensive lineman. I mean, he's not even their premier guy, and he's an impact player. So you look at that defense, you look at the way Coach Rivera has the whole team playing with confidence. Alex Smith is in a great spot. I bet you he's their starter next year. They will draft a quarterback this year in the first round, let him sit behind Alex for a year, and then Alex can ride off into the sunset, and whatever quarterback they take can be that guy to replace him.
All right, guys, let's get into talking about some of the things that we noticed from this past weekend of college football. Two big performances that caught the eyes of talent evaluators was the ones by Zach Wilson against Coastal Carolina, especially that Coastal Carolina defense. But most importantly, we want to talk about first here, Devonta Smith against LSU, Alabama wide receiver, continuing to pick up steam. So I would argue that right now he is pushing his draft stock maybe past Jalen Waddle, just because Waddle isn't playing right now. So, Russ, you're the one who wanted to bring up Devonta Smith. What were some of the things that you saw from him in this performance?
Well, I think there are two things when I watch him play that are really unique, is that this kid is a slight-framed kid. When you look at him on film or watch TV games of him, he doesn't look like a big, thick kid. But when you watch him play, he constantly gains yards after contact. He's able to break tackles, keep his feet versus hits. That is a unique trait for a guy that doesn't look big. And the second thing is he just has rare ball skills. He can twist, he can contort his body to make catches on off-target passes, which a lot of players struggle to do consistently. He makes it look routine. When I saw them a year ago, I thought, wow, I'm surprised this guy isn't coming out. I really thought he was the best of their three receivers. I'm not sure of the reason he chose to stay, but clearly it's been the best thing for him, because he has not just played well, he stepped it up from last year. I actually think he has a chance to crack into that top 5 or 10 in the draft as the first receiver taken. So I think he's really put himself in a good spot. As long as his medical comes back fine, this is a kid that's really helped himself this year.
John, are you in agreement there that you think that Smith is possibly pushing himself into that strong position to maybe be that first guy? Because right now the only other two guys ahead of him aren't even playing football.
Yeah, I mean, and I think he's also pushing himself into a virtual invite to New York for the Heisman. You know, the only question there is, would him and Mac Jones kind of split their vote, and maybe then allow a Kyle Trask to kind of come through there if he has a big game the next 2 weeks. Trask now gets LSU after Jones, and then they get a matchup potentially against each other, because Trevor Lawrence sitting out has opened up the door, for a guy like that. And if he's not going to win the Heisman, he definitely would win most exciting player, in the NCAA. Two of those plays last week, and you're doing it against guys, that are going to play with you in the pros, and making it look that easy. You could easily see, him getting picked like back in the day where Joey Galloway went, 3, 5, 7, something in that neighborhood. Because if you can be that dominant with those two traits, the vertical part of the game, and then also being an all-around receiver, you see what that means at the next level. And he's done nothing but, give you the idea that, he can be not only a number one, receiver at the next level, but, an immediate, impact performer there. So I think he is really trending in the right direction. And like I said, would not be surprising if he, above his teammate Najee Harris, is not the highest rated Heisman non-quarterback.
And I'd argue also he's got to be a favorite right now for the Blitnikoff. I can't think of another receiver right now who's been as dominant as him. I would like to open this one question up, though, because one player who has been picking up a lot of steam lately, and I work with Ryan Roberts, who's a part of NFL Draft Bible on another show. We're kind of on the same page with this. Mac Jones has somehow worked his way into this first-round conversation. Some people really think he could be a developmental guy. Others, like Ryan and I, believe that he doesn't really have those traits that you want in a first-round quarterback, and maybe could turn into a really good backup. I'm curious to hear, where do you guys sit on him, and maybe what did you see from him this past weekend?
I mean, I've not sat down and graded him, but from what I've seen when I've watched him, I mean, I think he's a good college quarterback. He's doing everything exactly how he's coached. You can tell he knows what's going on around him. He's not going to push things to take risks because he understands how talented the team is, so he doesn't have to gamble for them to be successful. I like him. I don't think this guy is a guy that's going to realistically challenge to be a first-round pick. I think this is a guy that teams are going to really try to get a feel for, at least in my eyes, because when you watch him on TV, the questions I have are, how quick does he get things done? Can he set up and get rid of the ball really fast when he has to? And does he truly have the elite arm strength to make the far side out throw when he has to just drive into it and throw it to from the far side hash? Those two things to me are tough to see on TV. I'd love to get a chance to see him live to determine that, but I don't right now envision this kid as a first-round guy.
John, are you on the same page?
I think it's a lot of what you've seen out of the guys that have played there, a lot of the time in the last, 10 to even 20 years, where, hey, you could throw 35, touchdowns in the SEC, lead your team to an undefeated season, and be a very pedestrian, type NFL prospect. And we've seen them come through, Alabama, especially at the quarterback position, throughout their time. Again, you're playing, literally every guy is an NFL player. And you have three receivers who could easily be a 1, 2, and 3 at the NFL level. You have a running back who's playing, the starter's playing, Robinson's playing in the NFL, and you have a top probably 5 or 7, offensive tackle, in the draft as well. Now, when you pull Mac Jones out of that and just give him to me as his own, person, and evaluate him as what he would be, again, now, I mean, he's got to come back, to me. And then Alabama has an interesting scenario, because would they like him back and you'd be number 1 in the country? If he leaves, you're probably still top 5 with the number 1 quarterback from last year's class, Bryce Young, sitting in the wings waiting to play. So you kind of have the best of both worlds, there, because the funny thing is what Mac Jones has been able to do and can play it all the way out to a national championship and a Heisman on paper, pedigree-wise, Bryce Young could catch him in the offseason and next fall, and at some point, if he gets in the lineup, be a better quarterback than Mac Jones, right? So you have a very interesting scenario there. But I'll also say, you didn't ask it, but I'll give it to you. I'm not in love in saying that Kyle Trask, who's in the Heisman running, is necessarily a for sure successful NFL quarterback. Can he get drafted? Well, he will. Is it going to be as high as people think? No. And is he a for sure NFL guy in terms of, is he playing on Sundays and somebody's future starting quarterback? I'm not sure that grade is going to be, exactly where people think. There's going to be a couple of other guys for sure going in the first round. I don't see it being either one of them two. And if I'm Mac Jones, I'm making it hard on Nick Saban because I'm coming back.
It's really interesting that you bring up Trask, because I think that the both of them are continuously brought up in the same conversation when you talk about not only Heisman favorites, but guys that have been risers at this point thus far. Some people continue to say that either one of them could be a first-round quarterback, but the one key deciding thing here is that they just get the job done. They're consistent. They don't really make a lot of egregious errors because they have so much talent to help them around them. But when you look at them physically and athletically, I don't think they even come close to a guy like Trey Lance or Zach Wilson.
I'll give you another one. If all of all these guys declared, Carson Strong would get drafted before both of them.
Yeah.
Because the arm talent, there's a difference. There's a serious difference in arm talent. Now, again, Carson Strong, he plays in a great offense. He's got an NFL wide receiver and an aspiring NFL tight end, who's really made, some really good improvements, in terms of stuff. But what Carson Strong has is he has an arm talent that is, definitely going to be different, between him and those two guys. If you lined up those three guys at the combine and they have to throw, Jones and Trask are going to hope that they throw 1-2 and Strong, is throwing after them. So Jones might get in that first group. Trask is literally potentially throwing every one of his passes right after Carson Strong, and that would not be a good place to be, in terms of at the combine, where you could go Strong, Track, Zach Wilson. That would not be a great spot, for Kyle Trask to be in if you're literally going to side by side be evaluated next to those two guys.
Well, I think when you look at Trask, you're looking at a different type of quarterback. You're looking at that sort of, is he a guy that's going to be an Andy Dalton or a Mark Bolger who has great mechanics, great timing, makes great decisions? Where does he fit? Is your offense one that is okay being limited by some of the throws he may not be able to make? Whereas on the opposite side, do you take a guy that maybe has more physical talent, but may not be as polished and as consistent and as smart with his decisions? And that really is going to come down to a coaching thing. But I agree. I don't think Mac Jones or Trask are guys that you legitimately look at and say, these are first-round guys. To me, these are guys between that second to third round, someone's going to roll the dice on and say, is this a guy we can develop? Is this a guy that's got a chance to be something 2 or 3 years down the road?
All right, let's get into this other game before we run out of time here. The BYU Coastal Carolina game ended up being a polarizing one because it was an unexpected matchup between two ranked teams. Many expected BYU to cover. I think it was like a 7-point spread for this game. Instead, Coastal Carolina shocks them. They play a fantastic game. They play a really good defensive game. That defensive line has some talented players on it, particularly Teron Jackson. But I'd like to talk about Zach Wilson. And typically, one game is not going to seriously impact the guy's draft stock. But I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts. What do you think this means, losing to a team like Coastal Carolina? What will this mean in the long run for a guy like Zach Wilson?
Well, to me, it's funny because I've heard a lot of people sort of after the game saying, he isn't this great prospect. He couldn't beat Coastal Carolina. He really struggled. Whereas, and don't get me wrong, I mean, would you like him to have won? Of course you would. But I think you have to look at, there's a lot of things that I took from that game that make me more confident that he is going to reach his talent level. Now, mind you, I don't think he's a top 10 quarterback. I think he's right now right at that, to me, the number 2 guy, because I haven't done Justin Fields yet. But to me, what I liked is he was resilient. This is a kid who you could tell he was not having his best game. And the sign of a really good quarterback, or really a really good player, is when it's not your day, how do you play? Do you give up and start handing it off? Do you only check down? Or do you maintain your confidence to make the throws, to try to still make the plays to win the game? And that was one of the things I thought Zach Wilson did, is he showed the confidence to keep trying. He didn't just become a shell and say, hey, almost every pass, I'm just going to dump it off to a running back, or I'm going to check the handoffs. I saw a lot there that I liked in terms of his mental toughness, his willingness to keep battling in the game. I think there's a lot of things to like about Wilson. I still have some concerns about his footwork a little bit, his consistency. But I think when you look at the whole picture, there's a lot to really like there. A kid that's got a chance, in my eyes, to be a really good starter in the NFL if he can improve on a few certain characteristics.
Yeah, I think the other thing I liked is, big ups to Big Law. He went with the guys that were in his backyard and, had the Yardbirds beating the Mormons. So I guess there are a lot more mullet T-shirts, being sold, in that area. Was that, you heard about, the Teron, but it was an opportunity for people to see the other guys that play for both of these teams, and that they weren't just a one-man band, on either side, right? Teron Jackson, we saw last week the video of the coach giving him the Senior Bowl invite. and Jeffrey Gunther decides to kind of upstage him, and kind of outplay him in that, in that game. And I think the thing you saw was what they brought, to BYU was an edge of being like, okay, you're bigger. You guys are bigger recruits. You guys have more physical talent, but we all run to the football like our hair's on fire. On the offensive line, our tallest guy is 5'11", basically, and we're playing with leverage, and we play consistently as a group. And what you saw was just a cohesive unit that they never gave them an opportunity to use their athleticism or their size variable, to make any plays, because they were on them and driving them down the field play after play after play, and, didn't kind of let that get to them. But you saw a couple of times that Coastal Carolina tried to be the antagonist, right? Like be the bully there on Zach Wilson. And the factor that Zach Wilson a few times in the game kind of shed that all-American, I'm playing at BYU. I got to kind of be quiet, kind of be a little more reserved. And you saw him a couple of times. The swear jar, might have gotten filled. Sam may have made her money, off of Zach Wilson. The factor that he had a little that, kind of, Jim McMahon, kind of Jim Harbaugh swag where he was kind of getting back, at those guys. I think that's kind of interesting, to see that little toughness, right? That's something different that he might have. And then I think that last drive gave you an indicator of what kind of competitor you're getting, out of him. So there's still some work. There's still some things you want to see, and the next part of his step, if he does declare, I think we'll get to see a lot of that. What does he do? Who does he work with? Because he doesn't need to really do anything in preparation for the combine in terms of all the athletic ability stuff. It's who is he training with, and what version of Zach Wilson do we see in their bowl game against a good team, which they should get matched up against? And then what does he look like when he's throwing at the combine or his pro day? To me, that accentuates how high he could go. But you could see a Washington, a Jacksonville, a team that's going to be kind of right outside that top five is going to have a real opportunity, there to go get him. And I think that's kind of his landing spot, is that somebody may have him 2 or 3 on their board, probably closer to 3. And then we'll see after that. Like, to me, he's the top of the next tier. Fields and Lawrence are going to kind of be in their own area together. And then Wilson has a chance, if he continues to ascend and work on some things and clean them up, he could be the kind of the clear-cut favorite to be the next guy.
So we've got about 9 minutes before we are joined at 9:40 by Larry Lee, longtime NFL exec, and also a long history as a player and administrator. Before we get to that, why don't we discuss some of the games that we're going to be watching upcoming this weekend? Now, we had some games that were pushed off because of attempts to clear up the schedule before championship games, particularly Notre Dame was supposed to play Wake Forest. I believe Clemson had a game that was scheduled that was moved. But with the slate of games that we have this weekend, Russ, what are some games that you're going to be paying attention to this weekend?
2 games in particular, UNC versus Miami. Part of it is the quarterback at Miami, De'Ara King, is a kid that a number of scouts had said, hey, you need to take a peek at this kid, because although he's probably going to be a very late pick, a lot of scouts have said when you watch this kid play, you see an elite athlete who has the arm to make all the throws. They said this is one of those guys late in the draft who's a real developmental guy, but because of the way the NFL is moving towards quarterbacks who can make plays on the move, there's something about this kid you need to take a real close look at. So he's one I want to look at. I haven't really seen him. And the other one is UCLA as their annual rivalry with USC. And they have the kid Dorian Thompson-Robinson. This kid was like the number 1 recruit in the country when they got him. A lot of people thought he was the best dual threat quarterback. He's had his ups and downs, but again, tremendous athlete, live arm. He's had a lot of inconsistency throughout his career, but he's made some plays in every game that make you think if you can sort of rein this in and get him to play his best on a regular basis, you could have a really good talent. So another kid I want to see, this will be the biggest game of the year for him. How does he play in a key game in terms of not so much them getting to the playoff, but it's a huge rivalry game. Does he step up in their biggest game of the year? I really want to take a look and see how he does.
John, are there any guys that maybe Russ didn't mention, or some of those guys that he did mention that you're going to be paying attention to in these performances in these games?
Yeah, well, I still think it'll be interesting to see, down the stretch here. We saw a month ago we had some fireworks with what Dabo Swinney had to say about Florida State's COVID issues when they pulled out. What's Jim Harbaugh and Michigan going to do? There's still a couple of more days left here, for them, and we'll see what happens, with that. So that'll be interesting on its own. Cincinnati at Tulsa. Is this a real trap game scenario for Cincinnati? You've been off. That offense needs to be running at full speed in terms of they're at their best when they have the combination of Desmond Ridder running and Desmond Ridder now the downfield passer that he's been productive at in the last 3 or 4 games. Their defense is rested. They've gotten healthy. But now you're at Tulsa, who's a one-loss team, has one of the, ascending guys defensively in Zaven Collins. And we all saw what they were able to do at the end of that game, a couple of weeks ago. So is that a trap game for a Cincinnati team that's right there waiting for Texas A&M, who now is not playing? If Cincinnati beats another ranked team on the road, can Cincinnati flip-flop with A&M and get, into that 5 spot and potentially be sitting there waiting to see what happens in the ACC championship game? Another interesting one, JT Daniels has given a very different look to Georgia because of the competency at quarterback, and they're playing against a team that's got a lot of confidence, and is doing a really good job in Missouri, and that's the App State coach, who developed that program and continued it rolling, and he's now out in Missouri, and they're doing some good things because I don't care what Arkansas and LSU and those teams look like this year. Missouri's 5-3, so you take your W's where you can get them, and this could be a game changer for them and their season. You go 6-3 and beat Georgia, it gives you just a little opportunity there, especially in recruiting. And they're playing good all-around football, like their offense and their defense meshes with how they're playing. The Roundtree kid is making a lot of plays on the ground. And then you just see a different guy or a different part of their defense every week with their younger players is showing little signs of improvement so that side of the ball looks drastically different than what you saw a year or two ago, with it. And I know they're not playing, but I mentioned it last week. Watch out for the difference in what kind of program Baylor is running. Where did they, they still lost to Oklahoma and it wasn't pretty. But again, they held Oklahoma to 27. And Dave Aranda has Baylor playing similarly as good a defense as anybody in the Big 12 statistically without the horses yet. So if he's able to turn the corner and drive some of those better defensive players that he's had at LSU and Wisconsin to Baylor, they could be an outlier in the future of they're going to try to play it differently than everybody else. They're not going all in. They're not going all offense. They're going to try to play it, a little differently, than others. And if they're the most physical team in that conference, it could get interesting for Baylor, and they could be competitive again in that 8-9 win, kind of campaigns that they've shown. But hats off to them, because that was a teaser game that I thought could go off the rails and be another 52-14, or in Oklahoma's thing, they had scored 62 twice in their last 3 games, and Baylor held them to 27. That's a sign, even though it's a loss, and a loss is a loss, that was a good sign overall how they played and how competitive they were. And the last one is, now you got Wisconsin at 2-2, suddenly on the road at Iowa, who's feeling pretty good at 5-2, and Iowa's physical. They've played more games, and their vibe of their season right now is much different, than Wisconsin. So evenly matched up. Very tough game usually between these two teams. It's usually a one-score game no matter how good one club is or the other. But Wisconsin clearly has lost their swag about their season, and Iowa feeling really good about themselves. You could see Iowa do some good things this weekend.
And it's crazy to see that transition. We're talking about after one game how Wisconsin was this fantastic team, and they were going to be dominating the Big Ten and maybe giving Ohio State a run for their money. And I don't even know if that's really the case right now from what we've seen over the last few weeks. So right now I'd like to introduce Larry. The NFL game. Larry Lee, a 1981 Detroit Lions 5th round pick, a part of the Fritz Pollard Alliance. 18 years with the Detroit Lions, from player to vice president of the football administration. Larry, thank you so much for taking the time to hop on with us today. How you doing?
Oh, it sounds like Larry, you might be muted. Okay. Well, we'll give you a second to maybe figure out the mic situations. I think Sam's going to help him figure that out. But we're going to have a little bit of a conversation possibly about this Detroit Lions situation as they cleared out their front office. That obviously is not a very simple situation to really resurrect and fix right now. Where do you guys sit on that while we're waiting for Larry, just to make sure that he's all good to go?
Well, one of the things I've always felt is that while the media talks a lot about, the GM should be fired and the head coach should be fired, they're losing, is they sort of lose perspective on any time you fire both men, which usually is the case. They usually both get let go at the same time. You're not just talking about two guys and their wives and their kids having to uproot their families and move. It generally comes down to about 30 to 40 people whose lives are being, and 30 to 40 families whose lives are being affected. So it's a much bigger impact on people than what's thought. And that doesn't include all the players. Whenever you change an entire system in terms of the GM and the head coach going, you're also going to see a lot of players leave. When it's just the GM or just the head coach, a lot of time there's some carried over organizational philosophy so guys can stay. But I would bet that the new GM and head coach, they're going to get rid of, I'd say at least a third of the roster is going to be new next year, along with a whole new coaching staff. Most likely at least half the scouting staff will be new. So it's very tough. I think a lot of people are saying, they have no talent. It's a total teardown. I disagree. I'm not saying Stafford is still a premier top 5 quarterback in the league, but I think what you saw him do against the Bears, he showed that he's got some tools there. He can still do some things well. So I think there's a lot of things to like about Stafford continuing, at least for the next 2 or 3 years, while you find the next guy.
Right. And I think that's also part of the equation here is, if you bring in a new general manager, you bring in a new head coach, is that person bought into Matthew Stafford for the future? Is that the guy that you're going to run with? Because more often than not, when you have a quarterback that is over the age of 30, you have a whole new – it's not like you're just replacing one spot. You're going to be replacing the whole landscape and the direction of this team. They might opt to go with a team that is young and still trying to fix various positions, to continue to go young and try and see what reward you can get for Matthew Stafford, which could net you some pretty high draft picks.
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, I think if you're an organization, if you come in and you're running that organization, you have to determine, A, where you think the team is at. Are we a team that we really feel can compete sooner than most people think? Either way, you have to also determine who are the quarterbacks that are out there that we can replace them with. You can't just blow Stafford out and go with nobody. In terms of, you can't go with rejects and go 2-14, because then in 2 years you're all going to be fired. So it may be a situation where you keep Stafford to keep things at least marginally okay while you develop that next guy. Because while some rookies are ready to step in, some guys need a year or two. And if they need a year or two, you better have someone there that can at least hold the reins, because I don't care how good the young quarterback is. And I think Cincinnati is a perfect example. Joe Burrow looks like he's going to be a high-end quarterback. But I can guarantee you, if they come back next year and Burrow plays really well and they still win 2 games or 3 games or even 4, there's a good chance that coach is going to be out of work. So there comes a point where you have to have someone who can at least keep things at 500, 7 or 8, 9 wins while you're finding that next guy to prevent your whole staff from being blown out. So I think Detroit's a very unique situation. The good thing is You have owners that'll spend money, and you have an organization where you're not going to have to worry about facilities or anything like that. Everything is state-of-the-art, top of the line, so you can do what you want financially. Just a matter of getting the right people in charge and getting the right players in the building.
John, are you on the same page here that, think it might be better to find a way to move Matthew Stafford? Do you want to keep him? Where do you sit on this?
Yeah, I think, the interesting thing is, his contract is such that now is the time that you can try to deal with it, right? If you go to Atlanta, it's not this year, it's kind of next year. If you're in Jacksonville, you don't have to worry about it because you don't have a quarterback, right? So you don't have to worry about that big salary.
But that's a perfect example of why you have to be careful, because how long has Jacksonville been chasing a quarterback?
Right. Yeah. So I think that, when we're talking about this, you have a division that Green Bay is Green Bay, but you've seen Minnesota and they've made their changes and lived with a 500 season. And the Bears are struggling and kind of regressing, in that area. And you're not going to be able to retain that defense, nor are they going to just keep playing that way, over and over and over again. So you have Galladay, you have Swift, you have Hawkinson, you have Taylor Decker. So you have pieces offensively and then defensively, like that, the whole thing of the vets and the Patricia, and moving guys early and trying to go through the draft. To me, I think that's where you have to put some pieces in and say, as an organization, can you make a run with what you have and say there's as good a chance for us to finish second and be playoff contenders next year, whether it's under these playoff rules or the old ones. And if you don't get that vibe, then you, I think, at least owe it to yourself to see would one of these teams that have been playoff contenders, maybe even in your own division, how much would somebody give you, for a guy that's been your franchise quarterback, but in reality has not taken your team, where it's trying to get to? Because right now, like I said, you do have that opportunity to look at it both ways, because the salary cap implications are not a death blow if you decided to make that trade now.
Not like the Eagles situation.
Yeah, that's a lot messier. That's a heck of a lot messier, because you're tied down to a 28-year-old who, do you decide to keep paying him? Do you try to move on from him? He's a very highly paid guy. That's going to be a very tricky spot. But this Lions situation is going to be very complicated to really figure out, because you have to find the right head coach to run with. You have to find a guy that's committed to maintaining the things that you believe in as an organization. And it looks like we're all set to get Larry in here. Larry, how you doing? Sorry for any complications we might have had. Hope you're doing well.
I'm good, guys. How are you?
Good.
It's great to meet you, Larry.
Great. Same here.
So, Larry, I always had a thought, and because you're with the Fritz Pollard Alliance, I figured I'd bring it up to you. Is I always thought one of the reasons behind the many that we don't have as many minority candidates for the head coach and GM opportunities is I don't think they're really providing the entry-level opportunities that a lot of gophers, quote unquote, like myself when I first got in the business, had that chance. There's no dedicated system by the league. They leave it up to each team to figure out their intern program. And I always thought if you required every team, and maybe the league funded it, to have 4 scouting interns and 4 coaching interns, where it was funded by the league, and 2 of those interns in coaching and 2 in scouting had to be minority. If you do that for 32 teams, all of a sudden the pipeline is going to start getting filled with tons more young guys and women that are ready to take those roles. And I've always thought that was something at the bottom that wasn't done.
Yes, well, there is a program similar to that, where there are minority coaching internships and minority scouting internships where young minority coaches get the opportunity to go to training camps with various teams and that kind of thing. But I want to give credit here going back in the day at the Detroit Lions. Ron Hughes, our player personnel director or vice president back in the day, Ron and Kevin Colbert, who is now the Steelers general manager, myself, Chuck Schmidt, we were way ahead of the game. Back in the day, we would bring in minority candidates or minority guys young in their career and bring them to camp and have them sit in and watch film with us. And some of the names, Terrell Austin, Charlie Strong, George Warhop, Tyke Tolbert, all those guys came through the Lions long before there was ever a program. So, kudos to Chuck Schmidt, Ron Hughes for coming up with that type of scenario. And we kind of had not our pick, but we knew who was who enough to bring them in. And then we had our own little internal pipeline going at that time.
Larry, I was fortunate enough to see you at training camp several years ago when I went out there to see the Lions. And I was mentioning to these guys that what a lot of people around the Lions as fans, the local media that covers the team, and the former alumni players feel that, the wins and losses on the field are a reflection that the club has pushed a lot of their former players, people that have had influence in the organization, and a lot of good people have kind of been pushed to the side or kept at arm's distance, and that those same people would now like to see somebody from that group be involved either with the team on a daily basis or part of this decision-making on who gets hired next. There's a guy kind of sitting in this four-box triangle that would make a lot of sense and has a lot of history with the team, that could be up for the GM job. And although Russ and I would gladly interview, that guy's sitting right there in the left bottom-hand corner. What about it, Larry?
I tell you guys what, just total honesty and transparency. I cannot stand the state of the Detroit Lions right now. I wore the colors. I've been in the front office during some much better times, and I'm just tired of being the butt of the NFL jokes, tired of being the laughing stock and that kind of thing of the league. So I do strongly feel that no one knows that organization as strongly as I do. I was a player there. I wore the colors. And then when I was upstairs, I was a rare bird because, in the NFL front office, you're either a personnel guy like a Kevin Colbert, a Rick Spielman type guy, or you're an administrative guy like Rod Wood or Rich McKay in Atlanta. And I was blessed to do both. I swung both between Ron Hughes. I was involved in all the player transactions, cuts, trades, free agency, everything on the left side. But I also was a contract negotiator, and I handled all the day-to-day team operations, training camp, team travel, all those things on the right-hand side, player engagement on the right-hand side. So, I feel that I have some strong credentials, and I know this place. And lastly, I like to believe that I still have a great reputation with the Ford family, and that I did a good job back in the day. So a long answer to your question, but yes, I would love to get back out there and bring some culture. And I think also that I'm the link to the older guys like my teammates, Dexter Bussey and Billy Sims and Bubba Baker and Doug English. I'm the link to the guys after that because I was in the front office doing Barry, Herman, Lomas, Kevin Glover, Chris Spielman, Benny Blades, David Sloan, Johnny Morton. I was in the front office during those days, and I'm pretty blessed to have a great reputation within the Detroit community with all persuasion. So I just being honest, guys, I feel like if I can just get the chance to get in front of them and explain myself and show I have a plan for success for the future. And I just hope I get the chance to show that.
So there's some pretty good coaching candidates right now out there on the market. Guy like Patrick Graham right now is starting to gain some steam, the defensive coordinator for the Giants. I'm just curious, who are some guys that you think would be really good fits with Detroit based on what they have right now? And maybe if you can't share anything on that, some of the traits you're looking for in a head coach.
Well, I'll be more willing to talk about the traits than maybe specific guys, because I'm still in the process of vetting. I being honest, I absolutely know the minority candidates because of my involvement with Fritz Pollard Alliance. I'm very aware of who is who on the collegiate level when it comes to minority candidates. But it's hard to say what type of coach would be the right coach for the Lions right now, only because I think there needs to be a trickle down mindset coming from the owners about, obviously you want to say we want to win the Super Bowl, but what kind of organization are we now? Because the place has gone through so many different changes and different mindsets with different people. I think there needs to be a reckoning where they all come back and we all get on the same page. We're all singing from the same hymnal. Let's make sure we are all striving toward one common goal versus different departments doing things differently. And so the type of head coach is going to depend on exactly where the team is now. So you obviously are going to need some kind of coach that's a good manager that will bring folks together. And one of the things I'm proud of back in our day was there needs to be a strong infrastructure as well. Back in the day, with colorful people, great athletes, great people in general, they're colorful. So they might bring some personalities. They might bring some extra things with them, right? So you got to have an infrastructure in place to handle those personalities. Like, going back in our day, we had 10, 11 all-pros on one team, all the guys I just mentioned. You don't think there were personalities, with all those guys? Yes, but we had an infrastructure upstairs that allowed for it. We had former players upstairs like Charlie Sanders. Sylvester Croom was the offensive coordinator at one time. Sheldon White, myself. We had football people like Ron Hughes and Kevin Colbert. And a lot of people don't give Ron Hughes a lot of credit, but, he spun off basically 3.5 general managers. Kevin Colbert, 3 Super Bowls, 2 Super Bowl wins. Tom Dimitroff, who just got fired in Atlanta, was a Ron Hughes disciple. Rick Spielman in Minnesota is a Ron Hughes disciple. And Sheldon White was an interim Lions general manager when he and Jim Caldwell won 6 out of their last 8 games or something like that. So there was some good football people and an infrastructure in place to handle all that potential talent that we had downstairs. And I kind of think all that is missing out there right now. There's no infrastructure. We had guys upstairs that players could come to and get good answers and talk to former players like Sheldon White and myself and Charlie Sanders. The infrastructure is vitally important as well, but talent supersedes all of it. You got to get talent in first.
Well, Larry, I want to ask you another question relative to something that you're very familiar with. So the NFL has put in the new rule change of granting extra draft picks to a club if they are the ones who develop a minority candidate who then goes and gets a job. Let me give you a scenario. There's 2 teams in the NFC South right now, and one of them has a really good assistant GM. Now, if you're the team that's hiring him, are you going to think at all that by giving a team in your own division 2 extra third-round picks for hiring a guy might almost dissuade you from hiring that candidate because you're also improving the team he's leaving from by doing that? Now, what were your thoughts on them coming to this conclusion, and did you think it was the best idea?
I think in some ways we're swinging for the fences, and just trying to get something going and something happening to help the minority plight. The whole key is to make sure that ownership has a familiarity and a mindset about hiring minority candidates. I mean, so that's what Rod Graves, the executive director at Fritz Pollard, and I are trying to do is make sure that we get potential candidate, or we get owners more comfortable with minority candidates and coaches. And so I think there's a barrier, only not because of being racist or anything, but just because they're not necessarily used to or familiar with dealing with minorities, and so we want to in a friendly way break down the barrier. And so at league meetings and the combine and the senior bowls and things like that, we're gonna make sure that they get candidates in front of them, and we're gonna just break down the barrier and try to just make it a nicer, happy feel good kind of thing, and then maybe some of that will trickle down, and they'll feel more comfortable in looking at minority candidates. And then the other thing that we're doing is we're doing a good job of putting young and upcoming minority candidates with veteran coaches and veteran general managers and retired general managers. We have a career development series where guys like Scott Pioli and Jerry Reese and Terry Bradway and Ray Farmer are talking to the younger up-and-coming potential general managers and giving them thoughts and ideas on how to, what things to look for and how to walk the ladder and get ready for the potential of being a general manager. We're also doing it on the collegiate level. We had a nice series this summer where veteran coaches like Juan Castile and George Warhop and Terrell Austin and Jerry Gray, and those guys spoke to young and up-and-coming NFL coaches. So we're trying to bridge the gap, and we have RPO where our candidates will, instead of run pass option, they'll be ready and prepared for opportunity.
All right, so we've already gone past 10 o'clock. Larry, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about this general manager search and some of the various efforts to bring in more minority members of NFL front offices and also coaching candidates. That's going to be it from us here, though, on NFL Draft Bible. Please make sure you hit that subscribe button, follow button, wherever you might be tuning in, and you can catch us tomorrow again at 9 a.m.